we were talking about consciousness. So consciousness in terms of reader and authorial consciousness. If you remember, we have dealt with the new hermeneutic circle, which is comprised or composed of reader, text, and author. We haven't cut off any umbilical cord, that is the relationship between the reader and the text, and therefore both consciousnesses do exist in the hermeneutic circle and should be mentioned or considered at least. All right, here he added that, to put it another way, we refer to a verbal expression to a thought. That is a verbal expression to a thought. What this means, as Hirsch argues in his book, the aims of interpretation is that in understanding a text, we should attempt to grasp it in paraphrase. So here there is a kind of a behavior from the part of the reader. He's going to paraphrase. Here, what the author means to say is, the beginning of our response might go something like, what the author means to say is that. Here lies the validity of interpretation, whether this interpretation, this paraphrasing is valid or not. That should be taken from the perspective of the reader, of course. The reader is not going to provide similar words, expressions, and phrases, thoughts. He's not going to mimic the reader when paraphrasing. It is a kind of interpretation. So the words that I use are the readers, so therefore they are themselves and by turn loaded with other thoughts. Behind these thoughts we find ideologies, style, linguistic competence, language use and usage, everything that is embedded in the mindset, the intellect, or the cognitive system of the reader is going to be displayed through, let's say, a canon or brackets or epoche, that is the authors. I don't think it's fair enough to consider paraphrasing as interpretation, even though we consider the intentional policy and the historical sense of the words. The validity of interpretation is at stake. Another quotation here. It's tempting to say that this is just absolute total nonsense. We use a text in that case, which is actual and ready to hand, to find meaning in something at best virtual, something we don't have available to us. Why don't we just find meaning in the text? That would make more sense. So there is this kind of let's say discrepancy, discreteness between meaning and significance of the text. They are different. The meaning of the text is quite embedded in the text, in the words and phrases, and the intentional or the intention, of the reader that is in the text. And the significance of the text is not authorial. It is the readers, the readership, problem of paraphrasing here has been tackled by Hirsch. He further argues that if you can put an author's words in other words, those other words will secure the intended meaning. The author's thought. What do you think about that? I don't think that it is true. It is not always true. It does not always describe this in other words. That is, you provide other words to explain or the meaning of the text. That is, when you say meaning and significance, meaning here belongs to the other, let's say, the other side, so to speak, behind the curtains. All right. This shall concede it will matter to have done so, and we can't consider whether there is in any such thing as a referent for an utterance. We need to realize that, practically speaking, the necessity of appealing to paraphrase in order to guarantee mutual understanding certainly does entail presupposing that meaning is referred to a thought. So this is a presupposition, or it is not like predeterminism. It is presupposition. These are speculations. You are going to speculate, and therefore are going to play on meaning, on words. You are going to speculate on the part to get the whole. If it does ring a bell for you, part from the whole, and the whole to the part, and so on. The close reading. This is the lecture of the close reading. This is why I said that literary criticism or different theories are intertwined. There is a co-relationship between them. There is no limit to the reader or the critic to approach a literary text or deal with literary theory at once, or literary criticism in terms of reading or translating literary texts. Now, Clint Brooke, a new critic and critically of Hirsch's mentor, the mentor of mentors Wimsatt, had written an essay called "The Heresy of Paraphrase." I've sent you the essay, by the way. No doubt, also, no Hirsch's mind, insisting that literary interpretation is a wooden, mechanical, inflexible exercise if it reduces the complexity of a textual surface to paraphrase. There, I'll leave the question paraphrase for the moment. For I ask that Hirsch argues in another passage I have given you, I will paraphrase now, that Gadamer fails to realize the difference between the meaning of a text and the significance of the text. The meaning of the text, what the author intended it to mean. Intended, and that is their intention, and which we can establish with the reliable paraphrase. And this is not the case. We do not know the intention of the author so far. And the significance of the text, to which Hirsch does not deny interest, is the meaning for us. The way in which, for example, we can translate it into our own terms historically, or can adapt it to a cause or to an intellectual outlook. The fact of talking about that merger of horizons, our horizon and the horizon of the text. As a matter of definition, Hirsch's distinction is in itself clear enough and even rather bracing. Yet to secure the distinction is actual practice. To say that you know the author's meaning and will not, in a wholly distinct gesture, explain how the meaning is significant for you, well, that would be a feat. Turning then to Wolfgang Issa, this theorist is concerned what we call the act of reading of the act der Lesens. The act of reading in his book, The Implied Reader, 1974. The other book is the Reading Phenomenon. They have held like the seminars on the reception theory and the aesthetics of reception. Isa Wolfgang believes that a reader is going to interact with words and phrases, and it should take at least 15 minutes to start the psychological phenomenon to generate, if so to speak. Here, Roman Ingarden, the Polish scholar who is quoted frequently in the essay you have read, yes, it is with Ingarden in mind that Issa speaks of the gaps of which Ingarden does not approve between sentence thoughts and sentence thought not. That is, the gaps between text and reader. This is for Ingarden, and for Issa Wolfgang, the reader and the text shall meet in the meaning ground. There is a ground that should be the meeting point of reading, of the readers, and words, phrases, and sentences. All right. Now, the reception theory has been partly theoretical, partly scholarly field, one that is still flourishing in recent movements, such as the history of the book and study media reception. Later in his career, Issa taught annually at the University of California, Irvine, and by the time he was pursuing a new aspect of his project that he called the anthropology of fiction, posing the fundamental questions of why we have fiction and why we tell stories to each other. All of Issa's work is grounded in the notion of literature as fiction. He's almost exclusively a scholar of the novel. In fact, an important difference between Issa and Gadam is that whereas Gadam is an intellectual historian whose canonical texts are works of philosophy, works of social thought, and classical works of literature, Issa has always been a student of literary narratives. Issa has produced this implied reader, the patterns of communication in text. He believed that there are some patterns that do not belong to like textures that do not belong to the unfolding of events, words and phrases that shall not be counted as in numbers in the text, and they are patterns and patterned in a certain way to communicate with the reader. An experiment has been done or had been done last year with master students with the Hawthorne Scarlet Letter, and we believed that we found some patterns of communication. Yes. All right, we are going through this experiment for the second or third time with this year's learners. Now, yet despite these differences, you will see as you read, he said that in tone and in his understanding of the way we negotiate the word of text, he much more closely resembles Gadaman than Hirsch. We can put this into different ways. We can say that for one thing, that Isa reconstruct what Gadamer says and Hirsch denies about the merger of horizons. For example, he says the convergence of text and reader brings the literary work into existence. This is Wolfgang Isa's words. Here, Gadamer would speak of the merger of the reader's horizon with the horizon within which the text appears, convergence, merger. It is not the text is horizon, it is not the reader's horizon, it is the effective history that takes place when those horizons merge, that constitutes the work. When they merge. If they do not merge, the work is obsolete. Partly someone else's work, partly the reader's. This amounts to saying that the space of meaning is virtual. And the word he uses, and this convergence can be precisely pinpointed, but must always remain virtual, and is not to be identified either with the reality of the text or with the individual disposition of the reader. One text is potentially capable of several different realizations. Of course, it depends on the approaches or the reader himself. It depends on the perspective. It depends on the ideology of that particular. It depends on the linguistic competencies that are available in the reader's mindset or recognition of words, or that particular amount of historicism. And no reading can ever exhaust the full potential, for each individual reader will fill in the gaps in his own way. So the same gaps, Gadamer's gaps and Isa Wolfgang's gaps to be filled by the reader. Again and again, gaps, also called spark plugs to mind. For the electrical current to operate in a spark plug, the 2 points of contact have to be gapped. They have to be forced apart to a certain degree, but not too far, too much. There is no spark. Too little, you short out, and there is no spark. It seems to me then that the effect of reading, the movement back and forth across the gap between the reader and the text, can be understood as though the relationship between the reader and the text were the relationship between the 2 points of the spark plug. But here they are talking about whether the distance is too little and short or long or something like that. They shouldn't be too far. Here we are talking about the fact that there should be this continuity and not discontinuity, and continuity, discontinuity between while reading, while performing the act of reading, because there is a mental cognitive phenomenon, a retrieval of words and phrases in chain. There is a kind of chain, there is a kind of sequences or sequencers. There is the kind of let's call it numbered, organized in number, chronological, or whatever you want to call it. It means that if there is an interruption, that moment of interrupt shall spoil the meaning. Now, how then does Isa differ from Gadamer? We shall decipher and answer that question along with the continuation of the reading of Fry's lecture on configurative reading for next time, inshallah. Thank you very much.